The Game Gear launches in Japan, Capcom goes public, and VGA steals Christmas. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. On this episode, we will look back at the biggest stories in and around the video game industry in January of 1991. As always, we'll mostly be using magazine cover dates, and those are, of course, always a bit behind the actual events. Disclaimer over. But, I'm your host, Carl, and as always, I'm here together with my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Excellent. So, we're back for another episode. Peter, let's get into the obligatory banter.
Of course. Dude, you know what's new?
What's new?
The headset. I stole my girlfriend's headset and I told her, I was like, hey, sweetheart, I'm going to steal your headset for tonight's recording. And she was like, but I'm going to need it tomorrow. I was like, yeah, sure. I actually want it to be done by tomorrow, recording that thing. So let's see how that goes.
Basically, we've trained her to expect these things to go long. Is really what you're trying
exactly. to do. This is actually what I was talking about. But she doesn't know that we changed the format, so she'll be totally surprised when I come out in like 1.2 hours, 1.5 hours.
That is actually that's true. That is a nice plus. It is a very nice plus. Now, we need to make sure we keep doing this on a regular basis. Otherwise, we will fall behind and not keep up our weekly schedule. But for right now, it seems to be working.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
And it's nice to hear a voice at least once a week. So that's a good thing.
Any voice? Yes.
Any other voice than my working colleagues.
This is true. This is true. Now, yeah, okay. I've got it easy. I'm a teacher, so I hear a ton of voices all the time. In addition to the ones in my own head.
Dude, I work at a hospital where we treat those things, so you can come over.
No. I told you he's one of the good ones. No, okay.
I mean, at least as long as they don't tell you to like hurt or kill yourself, you're fine.
That's true. Okay, so I think we've done our allotment of banter for this week, and we can let everybody know that you were on the social medias. You can pick us up on any of your favorite channels as long as those are Instagram or Twitter. We've also got a Facebook page that updates guests automatically, something. You can also leave us a comment at videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. And if you want to be one of the cool kids and join the 16 backers we currently have on Patreon, there's a link to our Patreon patron page there in the show notes. And if you do join up for as low as $1 a month, you will have early access to our interview episodes, and we're currently about 3 months ahead of the general feed on that. So while the general feed gets to hear the first half of our current interview with Mike Dornbrook, the second half is already been up on the feed for a while, as well as an interview with American McGee, and the first half of my mammoth interview with Greg Fischbach, co-founder of Acclaim. So all of that good stuff's on there.
Yeah, and so guys, if you support us, you basically can live in the future.
On a podcast, I almost called this a TV show. On a podcast all about the past, that's pretty kick-ass when you think about it. Yeah. Okay, so we have that out of the way. There's only one more order of business before we turn on the time machine. And you know what that is, don't you?
Exactly. Just 3 letters.
Those are
DOC.
DOC, the Department of Corrections, with our good friend Ethan Johnson of the History of How We Play blog.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, what did we screw up in December of 1990?
Welcome back to the 1990 segment, the last one. And before we get into this, we get to our Peter comment. Peter comment. Yeah, something like that. Thank you to Peter for prepping the original Witcher and The Witcher 2, which people forget about that they exist, and they just look at The Witcher 3. The Witcher 1 was a fantastic game. And 2 is also pretty good.
Going to leave that one right there and not touch it.
Oh, boy. Arkham Asylum did like the same rhythm combat thing. Come on. There's something
only
to
that had compelling, interesting characters.
Boy.
It wasn't just a guy going, I don't remember who I am.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. If I have to play one more game with an amnesiac main character, please shoot me. Sorry. Did I say that out loud? Yes, I did.
Anyways, continuing on. Okay, so in the 1990 segment, you make a comment that RPGs are making inroads into the United States. In 1990, absolutely not. Americans did not give a single thought about RPGs, whether that be in terms of console stuff, because this is the context you were talking about. So whether it's JRPGs or Western RPGs, none of that sold. Not at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
Did I say 1990 or 90s?
You were talking about it in the context of 1990s. Like RPGs are starting to make inroads, and they are not. They're
not. Well, if you count all the cartridges they gave away with Nintendo Power subscriptions, then you might make an argument that they are making inroads. They're just not generating any revenue.
Yes, there's of course many people who got exposed to Dragon Warrior that way. But I mean, even that wasn't, cracking any tops of the system or anything.
Oh, of course not. No.
Even if you counted all that as sales, which they definitely would not have counted that as sales.
No.
That's a loss. But, so our RPGs never did much, even into the late 90s. But eventually they'll come around, and good thing for them.
Well, I mean, by the late 90s, you got Final Fantasy VII hitting in 96, 97?
97.
97. So, I mean, there you're already hitting pay dirt, but by the time Final Fantasy III comes out, it's already a kind of a big deal on the Super Nintendo.
Not really, though, because especially because Final Fantasy III in the States cost a ton. Because it was on it used extra chips in it and whatnot. So it was a premium game. And it's a fantastic game. But it just didn't sell that well.
Really? Okay. I've thought it, at least for the category, it did fairly well, especially since they
maybe, but that category was way down the list.
Well, of course. I mean, if you're going to put it up against stuff like Super Mario Kart and Metroid and stuff like that, it's not
Super
going to be a blip.
Sell gangbusters or anything. But that unreliable sales figures aside, RPGs did not on consoles. Did not.
I agree. Just very, very slow start.
Yeah.
Okay.
So next one is a speaking faux pas that I must nail you for. Read the anime when you're referring to Strider.
What did I say?
You said read the anime.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. I can't believe I just repeated that. Okay, yes. Do not read the anime. Well, unless, of course, you're watching it with subtitles. But no, there is no anime.
Yeah, there's no
read
anime.
The manga.
And the Strider story is interesting with multimedia stuff, but you brought that up in the episode. So
yes.
People want to look further into that. There are some resources you can look at.
Yeah, and then avoid Strider 2, the U.S. Gold crap fest.
Well, avoid U.S. Gold. That's just a story. Anyways, okay. So, and then in a later segment, kind of relating to what we talked back in the 1980 jump, is comparing arcade and home sales together. Of, saying that it's more profitable in home sales because that you sell more copies. But that's not really the thing, because if you make $500 on an arcade machine, which most of the time you're not making that much, but sake of argument, you're making $500 on this, you're making $5 on this, you have to sell 100 times more of the consumer good than to make the arcade good. And in a bean counter sense, yeah, there was a disproportion of what's going in versus what's coming out. In a large scale, when you're talking about a consumer thing like this, you are taking more of a risk when you're doing something in consumer. So that that the companies eventually made that jump was not an easy thing to decide, and it took them basically until the end of the 90s for everyone to be like, okay, no more arcade stuff, because they just couldn't, the revenues on that were just falling off. But at the beginning of in 1990, that wasn't really the thought, and so I was just saying, in terms of justification. That's
this is true. This is true. In 1990, you still have that difference. I would argue by the time you get to 1993, 94, that's actually flipped. And as a hint, if you listen to the second part of the Greg Fischbach interview, he actually goes into that in some depth, with the examples of many of the Williams arcade games that Acclaim ported, and this is also one of the main reasons why Acclaim, the deal between Acclaim and Williams breaks down. And he even reveals that at one point the two companies almost merged, because it just became apparent the real money was in the home sales. The arcade just wasn't generating the revenue, and that's why Williams then decided to start doing their own ports as opposed to licensing them out.
And yet Acclaim tried to get into the coin-op industry.
And he also talks about that in the second one, and he's quite candid about how and why that did not work. So, yeah. But hey, we got a Batman Forever arcade game out of it, so
what joy! Nah,
not really. No.
Anyway, okay. So then, sticking on arcade stuff, you talked about in Pit Fighter how it was more of a beat 'em up, which it is in the sense that you fight multiple opponents at the same time. But you said that there wasn't any one-on-one stuff, but the bonus rounds are one-on-one.
See, I never got that.
If you have two players, the two players fight off against each other one-on-one in the bonus rounds.
Okay, I did not have that on my radar. It's been a few decades since I played that, but yeah, okay. I didn't remember that at all. But then again, most of the time when I played the game, I was playing solo, and I never got that far. So,
yes, Pit Fighter sucks. I'm not going to miss it. It sucks. So don't play it. Anyways,
I do defend the game simply because of what it tried to accomplish and how it was pushing boundaries of what you could do with a game at that time. There is no denying that if you walked into an arcade in 1990 and saw Pit Fighter, you were blown away.
Or you could just look at Narc and it looks much better. But,
Narc was a boring ass. Okay, yeah, I'm not.
We're having a lot of debates.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I never, ever understood the appeal of Narc. But that's just me.
All right. So now we get to talk some virtual reality stuff, because now we're getting to the exciting part of virtual reality. We get to talk the virtuality machines. And And you said that virtuality might still be existent, but it is not. It went bankrupt in 1996. Its assets have been purchased. There's some people who sell some kind of something that's related to virtuality, but virtuality, aka W Industries, which was the actual company name, is dead. It is gone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know that they still have a web presence there, and there is product still being sold. But I wasn't sure if it was the same entity or if it had just restructured.
No, it was bought up by some people. I don't know that story. I don't care. Anyways, then when you're talking about the the most famous game out of it, you called it Pterodactyl Attack. It is a Dactyl Nightmare or Dactyl.
There you go.
Whichever one you want to do for it.
Yeah.
And then when you're talking about the model of virtuality, which is the fact that you stand online and you pay like $3-5, something like that, to do the experience for like 5 minutes or something, where you get strapped into the machine with attendants around it and whatnot. And what I thought was interesting is the way that you said that it was basically completely unviable. But do you consider laser tag to be an unviable option? Obviously, there's ups and downs on this stuff, but location-based entertainment, that's kind of how it works. And I think there were other forces that dragged virtuality down. It wasn't that the model in itself was completely untenable.
Okay, and here I'm relying on my own experience as a laser tag attendant. So the normal model for a laser tag facility, in my experience, as I actually practiced the profession, if you will, back in 94, 95. It's when I was working in a large arcade in Seattle, the Seattle Funplex. And we had everything, mini golf, laser tag, batting cages, blah, blah, blah. Now, one of the keys to that place turning a profit was keeping the number of attendants necessary down to a minimum. So any section of the facility that did not require attendance did not get an attendant. So batting cages, no attendance. Mini golf, no attendance. The big tube thing that the little kids ran around in, an attendant. The bounce house, an attendant. The bumper cars, an attendant. The video games, no attendant. The pinball machines, no attendant, and so forth. Now, with the laser tag, the attendant paid for himself. If you're thinking minimum wage, how much this guy's earning, you have the attendant standing there. When people go in, you don't go in alone into laser tag. You don't go in with 2 people to laser tag. You go into laser tag with at least a group of 4. Otherwise, it's no fun. Now, each one of them is paying you for the privilege of going into laser tag. Now, with virtuality, now the laser tag equipment is really, granted, you're paying more than the parts for an arcade setup, but you're still talking about a relatively small investment in comparison with a virtuality machine. And the virtuality machine can only generate money for one person at a time. So for each one of these additional units,
it can do 2.
You buy 2 units then. 2 CPUs, 2 sets of glasses.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
So, and the only virtuality machine I ever saw in the wild was in an arcade in Gainesville, Florida, and it was a single-player unit. They didn't even have a second player there. So the investment is tremendous. You have to have a person at attendance. In an arcade, it did not pay off. If you're going to do it in a larger facility and you've got like 7 of these things running simultaneously, maybe, but your outlay is way beyond what you're probably going to be able to generate off of those games. Because there's no, the coin drop that you normally have from a buy-in where, ooh, I'm dead, let me throw another coin in, like you'd have in a similar game or a game of the time like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or The Simpsons or Final Fight is missing. So you can easily throw $5 into a TMNT machine without even thinking about it and you didn't have to wait in line. There was no attendant and so on and so forth. And you could have 4 people on the same piece of hardware that probably cost you less than one virtuality machine. And isn't going to break down as often. And isn't going to break down as often. So the only way that would have paid off, especially at this time, is if it's the thing that gets people to come in. It's the attraction that lures people in so they'll go and spend money on more profitable activities inside the facility. So no, I honestly don't think that it was a business model that was actually going to work in an arcade setting.
Yeah, I was just interested to hear what your thoughts on that were, and I think by experience is something that gives your opinion a bit more weight on that. And I will say that one of my teachers thinks the reason virtuality failed is because he worked for FASA at the time, so they had the BattleTech stations. So you go into your pods and whatnot. And so over here in Chicago, Navy Pier used to be the big location-based entertainment center. And so they had the BattleTech pods and they had the virtuality pods. And whenever he would look over at the virtuality pods, he would see people, looking stupid, like waving their arms around in there. Whereas in the battle pods, you're all by yourself and you're just sitting down piloting a mech. So in his opinion, the reason virtuality failed and virtual reality in general, because you look stupid.
Okay, I can actually kind of I can understand that to a certain degree, or let me put it this way. I would understand that if karaoke wasn't as successful as it was. So looking stupid has never stopped anything from becoming successful. And as somebody who has enjoyed the battle pod things before, they always have a great setup at Dragon Con every year in Atlanta, Georgia. Definitely a cool thing, but you're just sitting there looking at a screen at the end of the day, which isn't quite as immersive an experience as virtuality. But then again, 12 frames a second isn't the best thing in the world for a VR headset either. So, I only did virtuality once for a reason.
So whether virtuality is the future of arcades, they'll need to find a different way to do it. So anyway, that's it for 1990.
Have fun.
Bye.
You know what I really like about Ethan?
I'm afraid to ask.
He does all the right things. He corrects you, and he gives a laudatio towards me.
I'm not quite sure I know how to take that, Peter, but I guess if this is what you need to feel good, I'll give it to you. I'll let you have it.
Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime. Okay.
All right.
Let's turn on the time machine.
Exactly.
And head back to January of 1991.
Now there's a new game in the video arcade. 1991. Virtual reality in the best way, fun way.
The market's very fickle.
Welcome to January of 1991. Peter, what's our first story?
Parallel board battle continues.
The AAMA, American Amusement Machine Association, which represents arcade game makers, continues to fight against the importation and use in coin-operated machines of gray import boards, despite the fact that a law legalizing them was signed into law on December 1st. We talked about this issue in our December 1990 jump. The legislation overturned a Supreme Court decision in the Red Baron case. Well, it turns out that there is an exception built into the law, put in at the bequest of the movie and TV industry, that parallels can only be used if they don't include assets, copyrights from other mediums, which would exclude games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, RoboCop, and Moonwalker. In addition, the AAMA is also targeting FCC regulations, as the imported boards lack FCC certification and would have to be sent in for testing at great expense, between $1,500 and $2,000. So
this exemption in the law, it basically excluded each and every game because every game character surely was a copyrighted asset. Or most of them.
Copyrighted from other media. So while some of the biggest titles, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is the game that almost single-handedly saved the industry in 1990. And we're about to see the release of the Simpsons arcade game by Konami, which is also going to be a massive success.
Okay.
So there's this wave at this point in time of arcade games that are doing the same thing that the pinball machines are doing. They're leveraging big licenses to sort of bolster the appeal of the games. And this provision would basically prevent those games from having a clear path in the gray import area. And it makes sense because often when a movie would be licensed in different territories for different uses, those would be different agreements. So they may have sold the rights to use The Simpsons in Japan in a game, but they didn't sell the rights to use The Simpsons in a game in the United States. They would have sold those rights separately. Now, that kind of thing is slowly dying. It's not as prevalent anymore, but it is something that still pops up on a fairly regular basis around this time. We're going to see, for example, Back to the Future gets a Japan exclusive game on the Super Nintendo that never shows up in North America, probably in large part due to licensing issues. Okay. And there's a ton of these little exemptions all over the place.
So, just to show that I understood you and understand you, in case a Sony the Hedgehog arcade game was released without the Sony the Hedgehog movie,
Sonic,
I can gray import that thing. But as soon as the movie is out, I cannot gray import it anymore.
No, if it's using the movie character.
Wonderful.
Okay. If it's using the movie character, the character from the movie, and the character first appeared in the movie as opposed to the game, then that intellectual property, even if the movie hasn't come out yet, the intellectual property still stems from the movie. It was still, the video game was still licensed from the movie. So that it doesn't matter if the movie's out yet or not.
Okay, but then I cannot import that thing.
Yeah, you can import it, but you're not going to be able to charge money to play it.
This is what I mean.
And that's the key. So, for example, if you're a private person and you have a JAMA cabinet at home, the Japanese standard for the arcade cabinets, and you're just buying these used boards from Japan for relatively cheap to pop and play at home, nobody can stop you. That was never illegal.
Of course.
Where it becomes a problem is if you're charging people money to play the game. That's where the Red Baron case said that's the no-go. And where this new legislation says, no, you can do that. You bought this officially. You can charge money to display it, except if it's using previously copyrighted materials. Because, I mean, we're going to get a lot of games in this time period. There's going to be a Captain America and the Avengers game coming out soon. There's going to be a Superman game. There's going to be a RoboCop 2 game, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that type of licensing going on, even in the arcade business, obviously a lot more on the home side, that is going to make some of the more interesting titles less appealing for import. To say nothing, of course, of this FCC certification nonsense, which is really just going to put the knife into this thing and turn it. Because if you have to actually get each of the boards certified, you're done.
Okay,
so,
got it.
That's so. The story, this battle between parallel boards, between the operators and the manufacturers, continues to be a big deal in '91.
So when is this battle gonna be solved?
Actually, it's never truly going to be solved. The law also had a sunset period that was going to end fairly quickly. And at the same time, the arcade market is in a pretty bad slump right about this point. There's actually a great quote from the, at that time, current president of the AMOA, the Operators Association, Jim Trucano, and my interview with him should be up on the Patreon, not in February, but in March. And he's quoted as saying at this time that many operators would rather eat barbed wire than buy another video game. And there's a story coming up very, very quickly. It's we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but video is losing a bit of its luster around this time. So,
want to do this topic next?
Yeah, we could just jump straight ahead to it.
Sure. Okay, next topic for today: video games lose their domination of the coin-op market.
Replay Magazine's year-end survey of operators showed that video games now only account for just 35% of national cash box take, down from 65% just 2 years earlier. The rise of the NES and continued growth of the home market is really hurting the industry, with more developer resources going into console games and high-priced, high-tech games like G-Lock, Galaxy Force, and Mad Dog McCree, appearing to many operators as very dicey investments given current return on investments.
Okay, so what accounted for the other 65% of the national cash box intake?
This would be anything from pool tables, jukeboxes, kiddie rides, claw machines, basically any other entertainment device that you might find in a restaurant, in a bar, in an arcade, in a supermarket, that is operated by dropping a coin into it.
Mm-hmm. Truth sayer machines,
love measurers, strength meters, all of that kind of nonsense. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you can put a coin in it, the coin-op guys basically will operate it. That's the key here. Video is, a lot of people come into the industry because of video, but and video has the advantage that, unlike a lot of these other devices, it's relatively compact, like a kiddie ride. You know, the horse that goes wow back and forth. That needs more room than a video game. It takes up more space in the store. But the overall question for the coin-op guy is it a device that I put there? It's going to collect money. The money's going to go into the cash box, and I come by once a week or once a month, depending on the device, and take out the coins and split the difference or split the take with the store owner.
Yep.
And so at this point, the NES is eating into those returns. The Genesis is now also on site. It's getting harder and harder to impress people with the video games that are in the arcades, just because they're not as complex as a lot of the console games are getting. You know, a Legend of Zelda, for example, where you're going to play for a long period of time. The coin-op game has to basically churn you out in 30 to 60 seconds. I mean, if you're on the game for too long on the same quarter, you're not making any money. If you constantly have to put more coins in, it's also not a great thing. The Konami, is about to release a port of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game to the NES. And it won't be as spectacular. It won't have 4 players, but it's still going to give that experience at home, and so on and so forth. And it's going to be a massive seller.
Right, and even without having 4 players, you can have 2 players.
Exactly.
So couch co-op is possible.
And
they saved.
and you paid your $60 up front, but for most of the kids, it would cost them $60 to get through the game anyway in the arcade.
Yeah.
And then they've only done it once.
All right.
So this is why it's one of those situations where they need to be offering something new. Now, there is that new thing on the horizon. It's almost here. But at this moment, one thing that you see going through all the old publications is everybody's wondering, will we finally get an innovative product? Are we finally going to see something that's not just commando guys shooting stuff? Are we finally going to get that innovative, brand new product that is not going to be too expensive and at the same time is going to give me the longevity that I don't have to immediately replace it in 5 weeks?
Yeah. Out came laser tag. Well, I think this is a sign of an industry that had too good of a time for way too long.
It's partially that, but also partially a lot of the development money is going to cartridge games. I mean, companies like Konami and Capcom are putting their money into the console games. And it's also the fact that it's a industry that is supposed to be an impulse purchase, where you come in, you drop your coin, you play a little bit. If you have to learn the instructions of the game, if you have to learn the strategy of the game, it's considered a killer for the title, because who's going to pop in enough quarters to learn, things like special moves, things like, combos, all these things that wink, wink, nudge, nudge are about to become commonplace in the arcade, but we're not quite there yet. So we're still getting over that hump of how complex can I make this? Microprose basically is going to fall flat on its face, as we've talked about in previous episodes, because they've launched their F-15 Strike Eagle arcade game. And it's a game where you literally have to play it like 10 times just to understand what the hell is going on. Once you understood it, it's a very complex game. It has a whole bunch of depth, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
But how many players are going to put in 50 cents 10 times in a row just to figure out what the hell's going on? And it's a single player game. Your buddies can't jump in and play with you. I mean, it's just the wrong product for the market. I think that is one of the driving forces for the arcades having such a hard time, or the arcade manufacturers having such a hard time making a product that is really going to capture the imagination of gamers.
Yeah. That's true. Okay.
Yeah.
On to our next topic.
Yes.
Capcom goes public.
Replay Magazine announces that Capcom Japan launched its IPO on the Tokyo Stock Exchange in October, raising $36 million. This, of course, is on the back of the massive success of games like Final Fight.
Dude, we should have invested. I just looked at their market value. It's $6.6 billion now.
Well, number one, remember, an IPO doesn't mean that you sold the entire value of the company.
Right, there.
You can do an IPO for as little as 1% of the value of
whatever.
the company.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yes, Capcom is a massive, massive company today. But again, their biggest hit is just around the corner. It isn't even here yet. They're doing this IPO literally like a year too early, but in large part, it has to do, I think, with them needing to just generate some cash.
Yeah. They just needed the money.
Yeah.
And I mean, their market value exploded. Well, I don't know that, but I think their market value exploded after this big release that we cannot talk about it now because it didn't happen.
It's still coming. But one hint is that the original title for Final Fight wasn't Final Fight. It was Street Fighter 89. It was supposed to be a sequel to a game called Street Fighter. Now, I wonder if that ever got a sequel.
We'll see.
We will.
We'll see.
Okay. And we're sticking with the arcades.
We're sticking with the arcades. The first rumors of the Nintendo Super System emerge.
With the Super Famicom having sold out in Japan, it comes as no surprise that a 16-bit follow-up to Nintendo's Play Choice and Versus arcade platforms were inevitable. The Super System would, just like its forebears, be a modified Super Nintendo that could be placed in arcades, giving gamers a taste of the games they will be able to buy for the home when the system launched late in 1991.
So basically, it's a demo machine.
Sort of. I mean, yes, it is clearly designed to advertise the games that are on the console. But just like the Play Choice and the Versus system, it also serves the purpose or the advantage for the arcade operator is that the software is cheap. Yeah. And that you can put a whole bunch of games in one cabinet. So if the player comes up and there's only one game in the cabinet and it's not a game they want to play, you lose that sale. But this way they can just choose one of multiple games. Now, this system is not going to be as successful as the previous generation systems. Okay. So, for one, it's not going to have up to 10 cartridges that can go in it. It's going to be limited to 3. And it got a really weird, funky controller that's supposed to kind of look like a gamepad, and Nintendo is going to get out of this business relatively soon. We're going to see that in the near future, in a future jump. Basically, they just realize this is a side of the business that doesn't make enough money for them to worry about, and they're so well established, their name is so well recognized, they don't need that additional advertising venue any longer. So this system will come out. A handful of games will be released for it, some of them more classic than others, but I think there's an element of, number one, they just outgrew this business model. Number two, the games are getting more complex. The games are getting less arcadey. And so therefore they're also going to be less interesting for this kind of platform.
Legend of Zelda Test Dungeon.
Yeah, basically. I mean, a game like Super Metroid wouldn't work in this. A game like Zelda is not going to work in this. It's ActRaiser also never going to function in this cabinet. Yeah, the number of games where it's just, beat a bunch of stuff up or try to get as far as you can in the level, they're just not going to be as many this time around.
Okay. And how did it work? You said it supported like 3 cartridges. So is it like a plug in and play kind of thing, or was each cabinet made for like 3 games?
The cabinet basically had 3 slots for cartridges.
Okay, so you can basically put in whatever.
Yeah, you can. Well, they had to be modified cartridges. You couldn't just put in a standard Super Nintendo cartridge in there. Okay. So the software already had to be modified so it would also interface with whatever time lock mechanism was attached to the coin drop. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So they had to be modified cartridges, but essentially it was the same software.
Right. I mean, otherwise the coin operator could have just plugged in any kind of Nintendo game.
Exactly. And if you go to countries like Mexico and stuff, that was extremely common. So you're going to see in third world countries cabinets that are essentially just a 16-bit console with controllers plugged in, JAMA cabinet type thing where you pop in your coins and you play until you die and that's it. Or you play for a certain amount of time and then it locks you out.
So why would a coin operator do that?
Because it's really, really cheap. I mean, you're not paying a licensing fee or anything. You're just buying a used cartridge and dumping it in there.
Yeah, but I mean, if my customer pops in a quarter and plays for 3 hours, or a quarter in 3 hours.
Well, it just depends. I mean, it probably depended, and I haven't looked at any of these cabinets myself, but this is my assumption that it would probably have depended on the sophistication of the person putting the cabinet together. Okay. So you could have probably done it on a timer where you just essentially had a digital clock running next to it or above the screen or something, where as soon as it hit 0, all you'd have to do is build in something to freeze the system. So basically to pause the system and then just wait. So if you put in a game where the start button was the pause button, but you didn't give the player the start button, when the timer hits 0, it just pauses the game. Okay. And then you could just have a message saying, if you want to play more, pop in more coins. And then it would unpause the game for you until you died or something. That would be one option. Another option that I do recall seeing in Argentina back in the day was people that would just say, here's a console, pay us some money, and, for so much you get to play for an hour or something. That kind of setup was also very common, and you see that then later on. It's basically the model of the internet cafe that we see in the 90s and 2000s. So it's not an unprecedented system. If you build it into the cabinet, you need a little bit more sophistication, but the cheap access to software makes it extremely appealing.
Yes, that's true.
Especially because you do get a lot of arcade ports, especially on a system like the Genesis, that are already designed for that kind of play mechanism.
Okay, you want to leave Pirate Bay?
Let's leave the talk of pirated stuff behind and move on to the big arcade video game manufacturers, the console manufacturers.
Yes. Sega's Terra Drive announced.
IBM is teaming up with Sega to launch the Terra Drive PC. This PC console hybrid will combine both the 68,000 CPU of a Mega Drive with a 286 CPU to create a machine that runs both DOS and Mega Drive software, but will also run hybrid software that takes advantage of both CPUs. The machine would become a Japan exclusive, sell poorly, and have no real software support. And no, this should not be confused with Amstrad's later Mega PC DOS Mega Drive hybrid system.
So let me get it right. You have a machine that supports DOS and Mega Drive software.
Yep.
And you have no software for that thing whatsoever.
Well, no, you have both DOS software and the Mega Drive software. So it had a cartridge slot on it. So in theory, you could run both. But there was also because the hardware was integrated, in theory, you could also write software specifically for this machine where you could use both processors simultaneously.
Okay.
Now, that would have been really cool because the 68,000 had a completely different architecture from the x86 Intel design chips. And each one of them did certain things better than the other. So you could have turned this into a dual processor machine that could really do some really cool stuff. But the only way it would pay off to design that software is if you actually had a large enough installed base of these machines. The only problem is in 1991, remember this is just after the launch of Wing Commander, 286 is not getting you very far.
No.
And so they launched this as a 386 CPU with the Mega Drive built in. It would have been really cool, but it would have been way too expensive of a machine. So, yeah.
I mean, however, it was like a Intel Core Duo processor 15 years before the Intel Core Duo processor.
Yes, but the problem is the dual core processors that we have today are compatible
exactly.
inside.
You can compare that. Yeah.
Here, you basically have to coordinate two completely different chip architectures.
Yeah.
If you're writing the code in machine code, two completely different machine code languages.
Yeah.
And it
doesn't make sense.
Just a dumb idea. Now, Amstrad would do this the typical Amstrad way. Simple, effective, it works. Their Mega PC, and we'll talk about it when we get to it a few years later, is basically, it's just a PC, and they stuck a Mega Drive in it and made sure that the Mega Drive could output to the screen.
Yeah.
To a VGA screen. So all it really has is the output adapter. And what that means is, if you want to play a Mega Drive game, you slot it in the cartridge in the front, and you were in Mega Drive mode, and the PC was shut off. You wanted to go back to the PC, you shut off the Mega Drive and turned on the PC mode. And it's not really a massive time or space savings, but it was just kind of, it's a relatively underpowered PC. If you still want to play really cool games, though, you got the Mega Drive library available to you.
Yeah.
That was the only advantage of that system.
Yeah.
But, okay.
It's one of those in-between times where manufacturers don't really know what to, release.
Yeah.
And they're trying different things.
And in a way, it's also, because this was a joint venture with IBM, it kind of smacks of IBM trying to figure out a strategy to regain their position in the PC market, which they have lost because of all the clone machines, and they've been desperately trying to claw it back. And they're just basically, we'll see if this works.
Yeah. In the meantime, sticking with Sega, the Game Gear launches in Japan.
Sega has thrown its hat into the handheld console ring with the launch of the Game Gear in Japan in October. The machine, a modified Master System, won't put as heavy a burden on your finances as NEC's Turbo Express or Atari's Lynx, but it still clocks in at more than 50% more expensive than the Game Boy. You get a nice color screen, the ability to add a TV tuner adapter, and a bigger screen than the Game Boy or Turbo Express, but still smaller than the Lynx.
And not nearly as successful as the Game Boy.
Well, nothing's going to be as successful as the Game Boy.
Exactly.
But the Game Gear does do fairly good business. Part of it is that it's using a very well-known architecture. I mean, it's running off of a Z80 processor, and it has the semi-backward compatibility with the Master System. So most of the games that come out on the Game Gear also get ports to the Master System, especially in Europe and Brazil. And often what the only difference is that there's slightly less screen real estate. So it's almost like you've cut a frame of the image off on the edges. So you got rid of the edges of the screen from the Master System version, and now you have the Game Gear version of the same game.
Okay.
Yeah. But by reusing that hardware, Sega has basically maneuvered their way into a relatively fast development time, relatively low development cost for the system, and they could concentrate a little bit more on the screen and stuff. The big problem with this, just like the other color handhelds, it's going to eat batteries like nobody's business. And so most of the Game Gears I've ever seen were pretty much just tethered to an AC adapter on the wall.
Sold as battery discharger.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great little system. The Master System was always a very capable system. The Game Gear is a very capable system. It's going to get some really good exclusive titles. Shinobi on the Game Gear is really, really good. And it's going to get ports of all the big games like Sonic and so forth. I mean, even some exclusive spin-off titles. But at the end of the day, it's a portable game. At the end of the day, it's not going to be as cheap as a Game Boy. And because Nintendo still has the third-party publishers pretty much tied up, they're not going to be developing for this system, especially because, remember, this is color graphics and everything else. The investment to make a Game Gear game is going to be higher than the Game Boy games because those are black and white. Your artist, it doesn't need as much time to make the assets. You don't need as much storage space on the cartridge for said assets.
Right.
There's a much larger profit margin for the development of a Game Boy game than for a Game Gear game.
And the install base is way bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's partially bigger because the number of games available is bigger.
Exactly. So, catch-22.
Yeah, exactly.
Sticking with the handhelds, staying in the handheld section, Cheetah launches the Game Mate in the UK.
Cheetah, known for their Sinclair Spectrum peripherals, is getting into the handheld game console market with the Game Mate. The system, created by Taiwanese manufacturer Bit Corporation, would get distribution worldwide and was one of the first, if not the first, Game Boy-like console to appear in the wake of Nintendo's success. With very similar hardware and screen tech, the system would get about 70 titles for it over its lifespan and get released in many countries by a variety of local distributors.
I've never heard of the Game Mate.
It's one of a bunch of copycat consoles using the black and white sort of greenish screen of the Game Boy. It can do a very similar type of games to the Game Boy. And I don't know all the technical details. There's some links to articles about it in the show notes. But it's indicative of the kind of knockoff product that's going to be popping up again and again, of smaller companies seeing the Game Boy with its relatively low tech and trying to get in on it. Now, the Game Mate is impressive mainly for its software library. Most of these knockoffs are going to get like 5 or 6 games and that's it. The Game Mate gets that distribution. Bit Corporation, I think they're still around today, does a fairly good job of contacting and building up these trade networks so they have representation around the world. This makes it possible for more software to be developed because there's a market for it. And it's just kind of cool to see everybody's jumping on the handheld console bandwagon at this point, and just to see it's not just the majors, it's also some minor players. And the fact that this kind of system is even possible shows just how far the tech has come at this point.
Yeah. You know, what really startles me is that during that time there were many Game Boy clones coming out in the market. In the following years, what else happened besides the PlayStation Portable or PlayStation Vita later on?
Well, I mean, you're going to get the iterations of the Game Boy. So you get the Game Boy Pocket, you get the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, of course, the Game Boy iteration. This is true, but I mean, next to that,
you're going to get the Wonder Swan. You're going to get the Neo Geo Pocket. Sega is going to release the Nomad, which was a portable Mega Drive that actually just used the Mega Drive cartridges. It wasn't even an adaptation like the Game Gear was of the Master System. So there's going to be other contenders in this market. And it's not, this initial burst is never going to be replicated. That is true. But you will have quite a few other handheld consoles come and go. It's just that
they were never as successful as Nintendo's handhelds.
never are going to be as successful as Nintendo's.
Yeah.
And I think largely because none of them ever managed to appeal to an audience outside of the kiddie audience. So while the PSP and the PS Vita are clearly teenager and above design devices, they're never cool enough, if you will, to really be something that a grown up is going to just casually pull out of their briefcase and play with.
Right. And again, only Nintendo made this step with the Switch. I mean, of course, the adult audience tends to be, I don't want to say nerdy, but yeah.
Well, I mean, the Switch is weird because the argument could be made, and I believe Michael Pachter, Pachter Factor, he actually said it right when the Switch came out, that the Switch is actually just a handheld. This whole idea that you can plug it into the TV is nonsense, because they just did that to justify the price, the initial price, before they could lower the price. But actually, when you break it down, it's a handheld. And now we have I believe it's the Switch Lite, which is
only handheld.
Which is handheld only, which was probably the plan all along.
Yeah.
Because Nintendo has their success with that. Having a console version of it, or a console compatible version of it, is fine and dandy for them, but they're not really competing in the console space.
No.
So that's why Nintendo is its own thing as far as hardware is concerned, but at the same time, when it comes to consoles, Nintendo has what I would almost call a monopoly on the kid-friendly franchises. You know, your entire Mario universe of characters that are so versatile. You can throw Mario into a tennis game, into a kart racing game, into whatever you wanted. I mean,
party game,
party games. They have that backlog of IP that nobody else has. If you look at Sony's backlog of IP, games like Wipeout and God of War and so forth, that's not a kid. They don't really have that big kid-friendly franchise. Ratchet and Clank kind of gets close, but really isn't either.
No, it isn't. And you see for the PlayStation 5, the Ratchet and Clank game, I mean, it's basically a shooter. According to what I saw.
Well, all the Ratchet and Clank games have had that element to them. But, that's just not, it's not that kid-friendly, super cuddly thing. And I think both Microsoft and Sony and Sega before them kind of conceded that point.
Yeah.
They've never really tried to go there. Even Sega, when they went with Sonic, they were shooting at the slightly older, cooler character design. And it's a smart decision, because sooner or later the little kid wants whatever the older kid has. And if you appeal to the older kid, the theory is that the little kid will follow. And what Nintendo understood was just keep it for the little kids, make sure the game is good enough. You don't need the marketing appeal if the game is good enough, and the older people will keep coming back to it. But you never have to give up the younger audience. And the younger audience will grow up and keep coming back to the old characters.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is why they don't need the technical gimmicks to keep going. And this is what we're seeing here, is that even these knockoff competitors are, even though they're doing the same tech, they're doing it cheaper, they have tons of games available, it's still not going to be enough because they don't have the IP. So it's that merging of IP that appeals to the right age, plus the accessible tech, aka it's cheap enough for the little kid to be given as a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A plumber is mighty, especially when fighting rabbits. Okay. So it seems
and plumber,
like
the B is silent in the word plumber.
Plumber.
Plumber. Yeah.
I will not repeat this word like two or three
Not a
times.
problem. Plumber. Okay, let's leave consoles behind. We've got big moves in the computer business.
Exactly. Hyatt's patent for microchips granted.
In July, Gilbert Hyatt, a 52-year-old inventor, was granted a patent to a microcontroller chip that would supplant Intel's claim to holding the earliest chip patents. The patent, which goes back to 1970, based on work done in 1968, could upend the entire chip market. Hyatt would ultimately grant Philips the right to manage the patent and would collect tens of millions in royalties before the patent office would overturn the patent upon action by Texas Instruments in 1996.
So Hyatt invented the microcontroller chip.
Well, sort of. And this is one of those topics where I'm going to just say this open to any of the listeners, similar to the way we did our special episode on the FCC regulations and on the AMOA. If there's somebody out there who really has dug deep on the background of chip patent law, who understands how that evolved and how it changed over time, I want to do an extra episode on this. I honestly do not understand it enough to talk about it super coherently at this point. I've been trying to read up on it. I want to do an extra episode on this. If anybody's done this, let me know. Contact us. We'll get you on here. We'll do a whole hour or 2 hours on this because this is the kind of geeky crap that I love. But what happened in this case was he had applied for this patent for an integrated microcontroller chip.
Yeah.
Now, the deal with computer technology is we had computer technology before this in the 50s and 60s. The idea with the chip is, how do I get all this stuff into one little chip? And this is where the Intel patents come in. There's also, I believe, some of it is shared with Texas Instruments. Basically, they were all working on this stuff at the same time. They sort of shared the patents. Again, I'm not 100% sure how that was divvied up and how that was set up. But Hyatt claims he had originally filed for the patent in 1970. Then, and this was a thing at the time called a submarine patent. And a submarine patent is something that can't happen today anymore. But where you file the initial patent, and at the time the patent office did not publish any details of patent applications. They only published details of granted patents. And the idea here was that if it took a long time for a patent to be granted, sometimes years, because a lot of research has to be done and technical details have to be cleared up and stuff, you didn't want the world to find out about your patent before you were in a position to start taking advantage of it under patent protection. So you didn't want the world to know about your invention before you had the legal protection to take advantage of it. That was the idea.
Okay, but then if someone else comes up with more or less the same idea before this patent was published,
well, but you still had the claim because you had filed the application first.
Okay.
So basically you got this placeholder. Now, what a submarine patent was, and this is an unofficial title for it, but you would put in the patent request. That would basically cement your initial finding, but it wouldn't be a really complete patent request. So then you would keep adding stuff, or they'd request more documentation, and then you'd drag your feet for a year or two. Then you'd get them the new stuff, and it would keep going like this for years and years and years. In the meantime, other people have filed patents and gotten patents granted. They're already developing and selling products. And then when the industry is big and powerful and has a lot of money going into it, that's when you finally finalize your original patent. Your patent comes up out of the blue, and now suddenly you're like, oh, all of you guys owe me money because my patent was first.
This is a pretty dick move.
It's a pretty dick move, but you can see how, especially if you're, and I listened to a great interview with Hyatt. At least a couple years ago, he was still alive. He was in his 90s. And the way he explains it is that the original concept started at this company he was working for. The company goes broke. And he has to continue the research on his own. So now he's a private person. And while he's still doing other jobs to make a living, he has to do all the research plus fill out the paperwork at the patent office, which costs money. I mean, putting together all the diagrams and everything else, he's got to spend a lot of money to get this patent through. And it's a long process, especially if you're not a big company with an entire legal team backing you, like Intel. And so it just took years and years and years for him to finally get all the paperwork and all the bureaucracy done. This is how he explains it.
Okay.
And so this is why, as an individual inventor, as a lone guy, not part of a big corporation, there just was no other way for him to do it in any less time.
Okay.
And, I mean, you can then understand why it would be very useful to have the system set up this way that, yes, other people have already filed patents and stuff, but if this guy really was there first, you want to let him, profit from it, but at the same time, you have to have all these other requirements that the patent needs to be done properly. So how do you balance that? Because if you didn't have that balance, the big companies would always win, and there's no room for the small inventor anymore.
What I'm just wondering is, if you publish a patent, it's a signal to the world, hey, go to this guy, buy the technology from him if you want to use that. You don't have to do the research yourself.
Yes, or it's, here is the idea, oh, we didn't even think about that. Let's do a reverse engineering of it so we don't have to pay the patent. And before he even has a chance of getting the product on the market, because we're a big corporation, we've already bypassed him and we have a product. And even though he has the patent, nobody's going to buy his patent because the reverse engineered version is already out there.
Okay. I mean, I get it.
And reverse engineering isn't going to completely defend you on a patent, but if you release too much information about it, you may find a way around it.
Okay. But in this case, I mean, he invented the thing, and
and this is the problem. He may not have invented it. The reason this gets kicked out a few years later, in 1996, is because the methodology he wanted to use to create the chips wouldn't have worked in 1970. He basically, his chip design was not realizable in 1970. It would have been years later.
Okay.
But he's basically saying, this is my chip design in a magical future. And that's where he fails. This is why it ultimately gets kicked out. We'll probably go into it in a little bit more depth, and I have a feeling in the next few years we're going to be coming back to the story a few times because a ton of companies end up forking out tons of money over this. But basically what it is that the decision of the courts, and I believe it's just judicial, it's just administrative courts here. Yeah. But the ultimate decision is a patent's only good if it's something that you can actually perform. So you can't patent something that isn't technically possible yet.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's where his patent is going to fail. And he's had a bunch of other patents. And like I said, there's a link in the show notes to an audio interview with him where he primarily focuses on the fact that he's being blackballed by the patent office because apparently, and this was I had a conversation with Ethan about this before the show, where Ethan's view of this guy is that he's a patent troll. That he basically just files patents willy-nilly, hoping that something sticks, okay. And then he can sue people. And so is this guy, the lone independent inventor who is trying to bring new things to the world and being shot down by big business and big government that are in cahoots together? Or is he just a patent troll basically trying to profit off of other people's inventions through legal means? Hard to say. I don't know enough about the actual story, but when I read this and I spent like 3 days going down a rabbit hole on this one. It really was. I mean, yeah, like I said, if somebody's done the research on these topics, I definitely want to talk to you, bring you on, because this fascinates me beyond belief. And unfortunately, I don't have the time to
you out of the rabbit hole once, and she doesn't want to do it a second time.
Okay, well, that and work and life and kid and Okay, so. But we've talked enough about Gilbert Hyatt for now. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on to more important topics. Atari debuts the Mega STE.
Atari's last entry into their ST line of home computers debuts at CES. Using the same case as the Atari TT, which we talked about back in our September 1989 jump, the STE will provide some fun new features enhancing the normal ST graphics and sound capabilities while also adding some of the TT's features. Unfortunately, the asking price of almost $1,800 will prove to be a bit too much for most consumers to swallow as DOS machines begin their ascent.
Those guys watched way too much Star Wars.
No. This goes back to the initial ST launch in '85. The ST stood for 16-bit.
Every Jackers can do numbers. We do letters. Wonderful.
Well, Atari also does numbers, as we will see in a few years with the Jaguar. But do they try to do numbers? Okay. And the TT is 32-bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't ask me what the E stood for in STE. I forgot to look it up. But this is going to be the end of the Jackintosh line of computers.
Okay.
Yeah. Atari is basically about, not yet, they're still going to struggle for a little bit, but the ST line is coming to an end.
Yeah. It almost feels like an almost dead man moving.
Basically. I mean, it's the STE. It is an interesting machine, can do some interesting stuff, but ultimately, it's like, why? I mean, it's just past its prime. There's no reason to be continuing this line of machines at this point.
Well, I mean, they must publish something. They can't just scrap everything at the last second. I mean, they can.
They're still pushing the Atari 8-bit computers in various forms at this point, so why not? And those were from 1978, or 79.
Sticking with Atari USA in management shakeup. Who expected that?
Yeah, Jack Tramiel. Who would have thought? Tramiel. Longtime head of Atari France, Elie Kenan, who just recently was named head of Atari USA in June, has quickly exited the position to return to France in October. The exact reasons for the departure are not known, but it appears that despite promises to have broad control over decision-making, a meeting with Jack Tramiel led to a quick dismantling of that notion.
Okay.
He will be replaced by Greg Pratt, the former head of the Federated Stores operations and longtime finance officer of Atari. Yeah. So, Eli Kanan is an interesting character because he had a company in France that in the late 70s, early 80s was the French distributor for Commodore computers.
Okay.
And when Jack gets kicked out of Commodore in I think it's 83 or 84, one of the things the new Commodore management does is they try to stiff all of these regional distributors because they're going to be centralizing distribution inside of Commodore. And Kanan's company ends up going belly up because Commodore won't pay them for services already rendered. And so what Kanan does is he doesn't know what he's kind of like, okay, what do I do? And Jack buys Atari, says, hey, I'm now doing Atari computers. I need distribution in France. Will you run Atari France? And he's like, sure, Jack, I trust you. And he becomes Atari France. He's distributing Atari product in France, and the Atari ST does fairly well in France, as it does in most of Europe for a couple of years until the Amiga 500 finally shows up.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that you're bringing in this guy who really knows the Atari computer line. It makes sense because the Atari ST has pretty much always been a bit of a failure in North America.
Yeah.
Mostly because of Jack Tramiel. And it's a success in Europe because, in large part, of Jack Tramiel.
Not being there. Okay.
In part not being there, but also in part the Commodore connection, because Commodore has a really good reputation in Europe. Whereas Jack Tramiel drove most of the specialty dealers away from Commodore. But we'll get to that story in a few years. Actually, no, less than a few years. It's coming very quickly. And, but not in our 30-year jump, in our 40-year jump. And so the press, when Eli Kanan comes in, was very, very hyped. They were expecting great things from him. The Atari faithful were all like, oh yeah, this guy really understands it. There was a big trade show in the summer, and all of the developers and stuff were like, okay, you know, this really could be the turnaround that Atari needs. And apparently he wanted to move the headquarters. Apparently he wanted to sort of separate the American operations from the general Atari operations. So he kind of wanted to get away from the Tramiels and do his own thing. And Jack basically shot that down. And according to one of the reports, he goes into the office, has this conversation with Jack, comes out, says goodbye everybody, and just leaves. That's it.
Yeah, and this is exactly how I pictured it right now.
Yeah,
this is how I pictured it.
That's what apparently happened. So, and he goes back and he's running Atari France. I don't know how long he stays there, but yeah. So he was done with Atari USA at that point.
Screw that.
Yeah. But
in more recent news, games are missing their release dates.
Some things never change. And yeah. So Computer Gaming World has an editorial this month explaining to irate readers why up to 50% of all the games advertised and announced for release over the holiday season have yet to materialize. The main culprit seems to be the rash of new sound cards and the need to move to VGA graphics. Many producers did not expect the move to happen as quickly as it did, and getting finicky DOS games to work with the myriad of hardware options has pushed many products back.
Oh well. Dude, what happened to the released when it's ready to be released mentality?
Well, that was fine and dandy until New Machine showed up.
Mm.
So, and this is, I guess, in many ways, the first big break from the home computer market as it had existed up till this point, because remember, coming out of the 70s and the 80s, the machines tended to be fairly solid. You bought it once and that's it machines until you buy a whole new machine that's not compatible with past ones. And with the exception of maybe some RAM expansions for like the Apple, nothing ever changed on these machines. And the EGA standard had been a standard on PCs for so long now. I mean, not from the beginning, but almost from the beginning. I mean, that nobody or a lot of people weren't expecting the upgrades. Because remember, VGA cards at this point are hundreds of dollars. It's a major upgrade. This is like buying a game console, sometimes more. And so the idea that people would flock to the VGA cards, and then at the same time that they're flocking to the VGA cards, they're also flocking to the sound cards, meant that a lot of companies freaked out. They were like, well, do we release the game in EGA only with the PC speaker? Or do we go back to the drawing board and redesign the game, or at least redo all the artwork so that it has both an EGA and a VGA version? Well, now you have to redo a bunch of stuff. You don't just have one sound card. You've got the Sound Blaster, you've got the Adlib, you've got the Roland, and there's new ones popping up all the time, and none of them are compatible with one another, or only have limited compatibility with one another. So
it's a mess, man. It's a mess.
It's a complete mess, and all of this is happening in the wake, not primarily, but in large part in the wake of Wing Commander. So do I bring out my product and it's an EGA game while other people have VGA games out there? Remember, we've also been talking about how Access Software was developing their weird sound API to do digitized sounds through the PC speaker and stuff that, worked fairly well. Well, that's one thing, but now there's the straight up sound card. I mean, they're not going to be happy with the PC speaker. It's the idea that for the first time, the software developers have to come to the realization, we started this project 18 months ago. What is the technology going to look like when it finally launches? That's never been a question they've ever had to ask before.
Yeah.
And this is just, 50% of the software is not going to hit the shelves on time. Or at least that's the prognosis in computer gaming world. So yeah, I mean, a lot of those early VGA games, they looked pretty bad. But you didn't have graphic artists who really knew what they were doing. They were used to working in EGA at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the option of day one or whatever, patches.
Patches were also not a thing yet. No.
And no, it's actually weird. The game is ready, so we release it. Mentality totally changes it to, we think we might get it done, so we release it.
Yeah, it's a major change. It really has completely changed the way the market works. And it's kind of, I mean, having known both of these worlds, it's very, very weird. But then again, I mean, if you're like me and you wait 5 or 6 or 7 years to play a game, you just wait for all the patches to be done, the Game of the Year edition with all the DLC to come out, and you pick it up for $5 on Steam,
Yeah, exactly. It has to be a retro, man.
Dude, I still got Xbox 360 games to play. I can't even keep track of which version of the Xbox is currently out there. I mean,
You're not alone. They all are. The name is just the same for all of them. Speaking about names, Sierra renames Heroes Quest to Guest of Glory. Quest for Glory.
Nice transition, by the way. That was very smooth. I like that.
Exactly. And no one noticed that I butchered the headline.
No, of course they did notice that. You all saw it. We all saw it. It's okay. Okay. Sierra's hybrid RPG point-and-click adventure game, Heroes Quest, So You Want to Be a Hero, has been renamed to Quest for Glory. This comes about after Milton Bradley, makers of the Hero Quest board game, did not take kindly to Sierra using their trademark.
So was the content-wise the same as the board game?
They were both fantasy settings that used RPG elements. Character, stats, combat. Obviously, the Heroes Quest game and the subsequent game series was sort of a light, I don't want to call it a spoof, but it was a light-hearted fantasy game. It was sort of, imagine a D&D game, but you only have one character in the party, and you chose fighter, wizard, or rogue at the beginning. That slightly changed how the plot developed. And you went through this world, you fought, you could upgrade a little bit, but you were still doing the normal point and click, discover items, talk to people, solve puzzle type of story. I
mean, this sounds super unique and original, so.
It is. It is, and it was a great series. If you're going to go back to Sierra Adventure series today, that is one of the better ones. There's even the original creators. They did a crowdfunded spiritual sequel a few years ago called Hero U or Heroes U, which is basically a continuation of the Heroes Quest storyline, or character of feeling at least. Now, the Heroes Quest board game was a simplified D&D combat style experience where you had a board and a bunch of little miniatures, and you had to move around the board with your character and fight monsters. Using
and it did have different characters, different roles, different maybe a thief, maybe a mage.
I honestly cannot remember. I never played the board game, but I did play the computer game version of it briefly. And
the computer game version of it, or the Sierra game?
No, the computer game version of the board game.
Okay.
So the board game gets a computer adaptation around this time, which is where this is really where the major problem comes in, because the Heroes Quest board game wants to license out for other media.
Oh, okay. Now I get the problem.
Well, and it would have been a problem no matter what, because it's just a name that's very solid. And the Milton Bradley game predates Heroes Quest, so the Sierra game. So this is why the Sierra games going forward in the series will be called Quest for Glory. I believe there's 4 or 5 of them in total. The last one was a complete mess of bugs and rushed out. I believe it's been patched up by the community since then. And the second game, which is in EGA, actually got a fan remake in VGA a few years back too. So, like I said, it's a very popular series. There's also a remake of the first game using VGA graphics. Sierra was doing that at the time, and they actually used stop motion claymation for the combat and stuff. So, an interesting series to get into. I've only played the first 2 games in it, and also you could save your character and move your character to the next game.
Yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, it was as close to an RPG as you were going to get with the Sierra point-and-click adventure game engine. The only major problem is I played the first 2 games on the Amiga, so I was never going to be able to take my character over to the PC. But I still do have my original box, and it says Heroes Quest on it, not Quest for Glory. So, and they made the change right before the second Quest for Glory game came out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like I said, interesting background story, interesting game series, and one of those things that is probably worth a look-see if you really want to go back.
Okay.
Cool. And that, I believe, is the end of our time trip.
And you know what?
What?
We do not have a company gone broke.
We did not have a company go broke this time. It's quite disheartening. I mean, really, you'd expect some proper bankruptcies, but alas, no bankruptcies this time. Maybe next time. We'll see.
Sarah, your time will come. Anyhow.
Okay. So, any final thoughts?
You know what we didn't do?
What didn't we do?
Yeah, the word of today, or...
Oh, yeah, we haven't done that in a while. What do you think should be our secret code word that people can send to us over Twitter or whatever just to prove that they actually listened this far through the episode?
A proof that they are a teacher's pet that want to impress their teacher by listening to the end of the podcast.
No, none of my students listen. Thank goodness.
No. Didn't you tell me that one of your students just texted you the word of the day?
Oh, no, I made a mistake. There was actually the words. It was a word from a old dirty joke video I made on YouTube on a different account. And they tried.
That's actually not better.
Yeah, that was much better. Yeah. Wasn't a dirty word, but still. How about transitory?
Yeah, those
there
are transitory times.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Like
now, any final thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to next week.
That's true. When we jump back 20 years to January of 2001.
You can't say 2000 anymore, can you?
I can say it. 2001.
One.
I'll try. I'll see what I can pull off. So, okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it for us today. Remember, everybody, if you like what we're doing here, drop $1 on Patreon, give us some feedback, check out the interview episodes that the rest of the world isn't going to get yet. If you find any mistakes in them, let us know so we can fix them before they go out to the general public. And other than that, have fun.
Bye.